The roar of the collapsing vault faded, not into silence, but into a disorienting internal issue. Theron found himself lying not on cold stone amidst shattered machinery, but on the familiar, damp earth of Okavon's post office alley. The scent of stale bread and wet cobblestones filled his nostrils. The morning sun, a familiar pale yolk, warmed his worn leather satchel, heavy with the Deicide correspondence. He sat up, bewildered, touching his face. No soot, no scorch marks, no metallic temps of minted copper. The world was utterly, jarringly normal. The familiar jingle of coins came from his pocket. Silas's face, blandly benevolent, staring up from each one. A chill, deeper than any Oakhaven winter, snaked down his spine. Had it all been a dream? The shamed merchant, the thief in the alley, the ashes of Renzend, the confrontation in the vault. He looked at the coin in his palm, then at the bustling market square, where villagers exchanged identical coins for bread, for textiles, for their very livelihoods. He saw the unthinking acceptance in their eyes, the daily, tireless dance within the praetor's dominion. But the feeling of the dream remained sharper and more real than the waking world. The crushing weight of the people's voice, the subtle thrumming frequency of control woven into every transaction, the realization that their entire reality was built on a deliberate, manufactured illusion of value. The coins in his hand no longer felt like harmless tools. They felt like tiny, gilded fetters. Theron, the mailman, had always delivered letters, but now he understood the true message. The cage wasn't just physical or political. It was woven into the very fabric of their perceived reality. A silent, pervasive lie. He was awake now, truly awake, to the invisible bars that held Oakhaven captive. And the unsettling quiet of his newfound clarity was far more terrifying than any dream of collapsing vaults. The clarity was a torment. Theron moved through the familiar streets of Oakhaven, but they were now alien, draped in a grotesque illusion. The scent of Maeve's bread, once comforting, now sickened him. The gentle murmur of market chatter felt like the droning lullaby of a slaughterhouse. His skin crawled with a profound, aching pain, not of body, but of spirit. Every transaction he witnessed was a fresh stab. He watched Farmagaro haggle for seeds, pressing Silas's coins into the merchant's palm. He saw the miller's wife meticulously count her coppers for a dress. Each gleaming disc, with its blandly benevolent face, was a link in the invisible chain, a brick in their self-built prison wall. They smiled. They laughed. They worried over minor price fluctuations, never once questioning the fundamental lie underpinning their entire existence. They toiled generation after generation for tokens that held no intrinsic worth, whose value was decreed by the very hand that impoverished them. Theron saw the subtle decay, the lines of worry deepening on faces, the constant grind for enough coins, not enough food or joy. They were marching, oblivious, towards a precipice of their own making, their steps hastened by the very currency they so desperately sought. He longed to shout, to tear the coins from their hands, to shatter the illusion with the raw truth of Renzen and Silas's vault. But the words died in his throat, suffocated by the enormity of their blindness. How could you awaken someone from a dream they believed was solid ground? His own hands, still clutching a few of Silas's coins, trembled. They weren't just tokens, they were potent and sin poison, and his people, his beloved Oakhaven, were drinking deep, building their own destruction one gleaming coin at a time. The pain of witnessing their willing enslavement was a solitary, crushing burden, isolating him in a waking nightmare of truth. Theron tried to speak the truth, not with a shout, but with careful, probing words. He spoke to Farmagaro of the coin's origins, to Maeve of its arbitrary value, of the invisible thread connecting every transaction to Silas's will. He was met with polite confusion, then a dismissive pat on the shoulder. Coins are coins, Theron Mav had insisted, bustling back to her oven. And my bread needs flour, which needs coins. His words fell like stones into a bottomless well. He watched them, his people, a vast river of humanity flowing towards an unseen precipice, their faces etched with the familiar concerns of daily survival within the established order. A terrible, soul-crushing certainty began to crystallize within him. The illusion wasn't just on them. It was in them, woven into the very fabric of their desires, their fears, their understanding of the world. Their comfort was in the lie, their security in the cage. To tear it down would not be to expose them to freedom, but to a terrifying, meaningless void. They would not thank him. They would condemn him, or worse, simply rebuild the bars of their familiar prison. He remembered Ren's End, its systematic erasure, and the chilling thought that had begun to form. Not everyone could be saved. Not the smiling, oblivious crowds who bought their own chains with every transaction. Only the outliers, the broken, the already skeptical, those who had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to gain from a world remade. The ones, like Alara, shamed and discarded. The ones whose suffering had already forged a crack in their acceptance of the world. Whose spirits, though perhaps scarred, were too obstinate or too wounded to wholly submit. The meanest, not in cruelty, but in their fierce, unyielding refusal to break completely. This wasn't a hero's grand awakening, but a chilly narrowing of his purpose. The despair deepened, becoming a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He had carried a burden of collective sorrow, but now he carried the specific agony of a chosen few, maybe, the most desperate, the most resilient, the ones who had already peered into the abyss and hadn't flinched. The rest, he realized with a fresh wave of nausea, were already lost to the gilded cage, its comfort a deeper prison than any wall of stone. This new understanding was not liberation. It was the final, crushing weight of isolation. The gnawing despair almost consumed him, a dark current threatening to drag him under. To accept that the masses were irredeemable, to stand by and watch them march willingly into their own destruction, was a surrender. And Theron, the simple mailman who had once only worried about dry letters, was no coward. The ashes of Ren's End, the ghosts of Elada's shame, the complex beauty of Hemlock's shattered device, these were not things to be casually abandoned. He would not shout the truth into deaf ears. He would not weep for the willingly blind. He would be cautious, tactical. He would become a shadow, moving through the gilded cage he now despised, studying its flaws, seeking its true weak points. If only a few could be saved, then he would seek out those few, diminished, the ones whose spirits, though bruised, still held a spark of defiance. He would not offer them a revelation, but a path. His quest for Hemlock's further research took on a new, grim urgency. It wasn't about a grand, sweeping revolution anymore, but about precision. He would sift through the old man's forgotten notes, his strange contraptions, not just for a counter-frequency, but for a means of delivery. How could the truth be presented in a way that bypassed the ingrained illusion, that spoke directly to the nascent spark of defiance he hoped still flickered in a chosen few? A coded message, a subtle trigger, something that would resonate not with the false value of a coin, but with the genuine despair and longing for truth that he knew existed beneath the surface of the preter's manufactured contentment. He would move slowly, invisibly learning the true contours of the gilded cage, its internal logic, its hidden vulnerabilities. He would become a whisper where he once delivered shouts. The pain remained a constant companion, but it was now tempered by a cold, calculating resolve. He would not save everyone, perhaps, but he would not give up on anyone who could still be reached. That, he decided, was the only way a man could truly walk free, even if he walked alone. The slow, cautious probing into Hemlock's scattered effects led Theron down unexpected rabbit holes. The old man's scrawled notes weren't just about currency resonance. They were tangled with observations on trade routes, resource allocation, and a dizzying web of influence. It quickly became chillingly clear. The fiat currency was merely the most visible bar of Silas's cage. The corruption was systemic, interwoven into every aspect of their world. The very water they drank, the land they farmed, the laws they lived under, all were subtly twisted, controlled, and manipulated to serve the Praetor's unseen agenda. But the deeper Theron dug, the more attuned he became. His heightened awareness, honed by the pain of collective blindness, now perceived nuances others missed. He noticed the coded signals in old market ledgers, the strange patterns in delivery manifests he'd once dismissed as quirks. He was no longer just the mailman. He was a silent, living map of the Dominion's underbelly. This sharpened perception, ironically, led him not to despair, but to a glimmer of hope. Following a series of encrypted notes left by Hemlock, trails of forgotten couriers, and whispered rendezvous, Theron ventured far beyond Okavan's familiar borders, skirting the edge of the desolation that was Ren's End. He found them tucked away in a remote, forgotten valley, a small, self-sufficient community nestled among craggy peaks. Their village, unlike Okavan, bore no signs of Silas's currency. Their tools were old, their clothes mended, but their eyes held a fierce, unburdened clarity. They traded in true value, labor for goods, skill for service. They had no need for Praetor Silas's smiling face on a coin. They were Hemlock's legacy, a whisper in the wilderness. They were awake. Theron watched them from a distance, hidden amongst the pines. They moved with a quiet dignity, their interactions genuine, their laughter free of the subtle tension that laced Okavan's air. A profound, aching relief washed over him, a counterpoint to the loneliness he had carried. Here were the meanest, the ones who had found a way out, not through grand rebellion, but through quiet, steadfast refusal. He wasn't alone. The pain of the unawakened masses still lingered, a phantom limb of sorrow, but it was now joined by the warmth of possibility. He had found a sanctuary, a seed of true freedom, and a tangible proof that escape from the gilded cage was not merely a dream. His caution was validated, his purpose sharpened. He had found his allies. The clarity he found among the awakened community was like staring into a blinding sun, exposing not just the path forward, but the horrific precipice behind him. The deeper he understood their self-sufficient ways, the more acutely he grasped the fragility and inherent rot of Praetor Silas's dominion. The system wasn't just corrupt, it was fundamentally unsustainable. Its value was based on a lie, its resources siphoned away, its people lulled into complacency by a false sense of security. It was a colossal edifice built on sand and empty promises, already cracking under its own impossible weight. Theron saw it now with terrifying certainty. The central government, the entire sprawling dominion, was doomed to collapse, not by outside invasion, not by a heroic rebellion, but by its own internal contradictions. And when it fell, the impact would be catastrophic. Millions would starve, would fight over worthless coins, would tear each other apart for resources that no longer flowed from the now-defunct system. A vast, agonizing death row. A bitter, cold wind seemed to sweep through Theron's soul. He remembered the blank stares when he'd tried to warn them, the casual dismissal, the unwavering faith in the praetor's smiling face. They chose comfort over truth. They chose the gilded cage over the brutal freedom of self. They allowed themselves to be bound, to be milked, to be led, and now the piper would demand his due. The thought was a searing brand on his consciousness, painful in its truth. They deserved it, not as a cruel punishment, but as a natural, horrifying consequence of their own choices, their own compliance, their own unwillingness to see beyond the coin. The suffering would be immense, a biblical purging. But they had walked, unseeing, into the fire. His pain was no longer just empathy, but a hardening, a grief mingled with a chilling, detached judgment. His duty now was to this small, awakened flame in the darkness, not to the dying embers of a world that refused to be saved. The cold, hard truth of the Dominion's inevitable collapse settled into Theron's bones, no longer just despair, but a chilling calculus. To be a hero, he realized, wasn't about wielding a sword or igniting a sudden rebellion that would only hasten the coming chaos. It was about foresight, about endurance, about a quiet, grim preparation. The central government, built on the shifting sands of a manufactured lie, would eventually buckle. Millions would perish, victims of their own compliance. That was a tragedy he couldn't prevent. But the awakened few, the ones who saw the truth, the small community in the valley, and any others who might shatter their illusions in the dying throes of Silas's regime, they would need a haven, a lifeline, a new beginning forged from the wreckage. His role wasn't to stop the falling axe, but to catch the precious seeds that spilled from the severed head. He committed himself to a new, solitary purpose, delving deeper into Hemlock's enigmatic research, applying his newfound understanding of the Dominion's hidden mechanics. This wasn't just about counter-frequencies anymore. It was about sustainable energy sources that didn't rely on Silas's corrupted infrastructure. It was about communication methods that could not be intercepted or traced by the preterrestrial surveillance. It was about robust, portable schematics for water purification, for growing nutrient-dense crops in unforgiving terrain, for building shelters that endured. It would take years, perhaps decades. The collapse might not come in his lifetime, but it would come. He became a living archive, a silent artisan of survival, meticulously crafting the tools and knowledge that would form the backbone of a post-Silas world. His days were filled with intricate tinkering, with deciphering forgotten texts, with making pilgrimages to the awakened community to share insights and gather their collective wisdom. The pain of Okavan's oblivion never fully left him, a constant ache beneath his ribs. He still walked among them occasionally, a ghost in his old life, watching them chase their worthless tokens. But now it wasn't a paralysis of despair, but a sharpening of resolve. He was building an ark, not for the flood itself, but for the fragile life that would emerge on the other side. And in that quiet, enduring work, Theron, the mailman turned reluctant prophet, found a different, harder kind of heroism as Theron immersed himself in Hemlock's deeper secrets and the practical wisdom of the awakened community. His understanding of the world expanded exponentially. The old man's notes, cryptic and seemingly disjointed, began to reveal a complex tapestry of forgotten knowledge, a kind of practical magic that blurred the lines between ancient craft and advanced understanding. He learned to manipulate localized energy fields, not just for power generation, but for subtle disruptions, to cultivate fast-growing, resilient strains of flora that could reclaim barren land, to construct intricate communication arrays that could whisper across vast distances, shielded from any external interference. He discovered schematics for devices that could subtly scramble the Predator's lower-tier surveillance networks, creating temporary blind spots in his all-seeing eye. He found algorithms for economic subversion, not just to create a new currency, but to expose the inherent fraudulence of Silas's system with targeted, verifiable data leaks. He even uncovered whispers of resonant frequencies, far more potent than the one used in the vault, capable of inducing widespread, debilitating confusion or even a temporary, shared lucidity that could shatter the illusion in a broad stroke. Each discovery was a double-edged sword. He was building an ark, preparing for a distant flood. But these newfound magics offered the tantalizing, terrifying prospect of accelerating the deluge. He could cripple Silas's information flow, undermine his economic authority, perhaps even force a faster, more violent collapse. The thought gnawed at him. He could end the suffering of the compliant, quicken the reckoning they unknowingly deserved. The temptation was immense, a siren's call to action, a shortcut to the inevitable. He saw the suffering, the quiet decay, and felt the hot surge of righteous anger. He could burn down the cage, not just wait for it to rot. But the images of Ren's End, the mindless panic of the Oakhaven crowds, flashed in his mind. A faster collapse meant more chaos, more uncontrolled death, a swifter, more agonizing descent into barbarism for those unprepared. His long-term plan, painstakingly developed, was about minimizing suffering for the aware, about building a foundation for something new, not merely about tearing down the old to precipitate the collapse now. Even with these tools, would be to sacrifice the careful preparation to risk the nascent hopes of the awakened. He weighed the immediate, visceral satisfaction of striking a blow against the Predator versus the slow, deliberate work of ensuring survival. The choice was clear, though agonizing. He would integrate these new magics into his long-term project, not as weapons of swift destruction, but as tools for resilience, for defense, for building the support net for the few. The collapse would come when it was ready, an unassisted fall. His role was to be ready when it did, to catch those who chose to leap, not to push them from the crumbling tower. The path of caution remained the path of true, if difficult, heroism. The magics Theron uncovered were not simple incantations or quick fixes. They were intricate, demanding disciplines, blending forgotten lore with advanced theoretical physics, requiring years of dedicated study and painstaking experimentation. Hemlock's notes were often fragmented, leading him down paths of bewildering complexity, demanding a mastery of resonance, energy, manipulation, and the subtle interplay between perception and reality. Yet, as he wrestled with the arcane schematics and performed meticulous, often frustrating, experiments in the quiet solitude of his hidden workshop, a strange sense of alignment began to bloom within him. It was as if the universe itself was designed to resist lies and favor truth. The more he delved into the fabric of reality, the more he found patterns, harmonies, and fundamental principles that inherently rejected the discord and artifice of Silas's gilded cage. He discovered that the very forces that allowed Silas to imbue his coins with psychic control could, with precise and difficult manipulation, be inverted to dissipate such control or even create zones of absolute mental clarity. The subtle energy flows that powered the Dominion could be tapped cleanly without the waste and corruption inherent in Silas's systems. It was as if the universe possessed an innate immune response to falsehood, and Hemlock had merely found the blueprint for activating it. This wasn't a comforting thought, but a reinforcing one. It wasn't about divine intervention, but about fundamental cosmic laws. The truth would prevail, not because of prophecy, but because the universe was built that way. Silas's system, being a grand deception, was fighting against the very currents of existence.